Thank you for doing this. I was really looking forward to this. I was reading up a little bit about you, some kind of interesting stuff. And are you in Siberia currently right now? Is that where you're calling from, or?
Yep, Altai region of Siberia. Yes, that is correct.
My understanding about Siberia is it's cold. I think they have gulags up there, and there's some reindeer herders. That's about the extent of my knowledge about Siberia. So, hey, it's probably what most people know. Probably most people don't know about the reindeer herders. But tell me, Justus, tell me a little bit about your background, man. So I know I think you grew up in maybe Idaho or something like that. Tell us about tell us a little bit about your life story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I was born and raised in the United States, grew up in Idaho till about 11. My folks became missionaries when I was 11 years old, went over to Russia. That was 1994. And so then the second half of my childhood, teenage development years were spent growing up in a village in Siberia. So I learned Russian. My folks felt their mission was done in 2000. I was 18 years old. And I was planning on going to college, going to university, just kind of standard American sort of way of doing things, and really felt impressed strongly to stay on and keep their work going. So they went back to the States and I stayed on, and that's more or less been what I've been up to for the last 20 some years. So make a long story rather short.
I interviewed, I guess just a couple days ago, a fellow by the name of Jordan Jonas. Is that somebody you're familiar with, or did he cross paths with you at some point, or I don't know if you met him?
Yeah, Jordan and I are really good friends. If my memory serves me, he came over the first time to Russia in 2007. We had connected through some mutual acquaintances, and he wanted to come over and help us out a little bit with a couple of projects that we were doing. We were right in the beginning process of building an orphanage. And so he came over and helped us with that, and learned the language, and then ended up working up with the Northern Reindeer peoples for several years in a row. And so he was always, through our mission compound and through our work there, coming up and coming down from meeting up with the reindeer people. So yeah, Jordan and I are pretty good friends.
Yeah, he was a very interesting fellow. Just amazing story with his, just a lone survival win, which is pretty cool to see. Let me ask you about, my understanding is you started out, doing some mission work, helping found some churches, doing a little bit of farming, and then there was some issue. Yeah. I guess because you became fairly popular in Russia, and there was something about some cheese, like somebody saying, why buy this silly local cheese? We can imported cheese from Italy or something like that, and that propelled. I guess I don't. Can you tell us a little bit about that situation?
Yeah, well, like I said, in 2000, my folks went back to the States. I came back and started their work. They've been doing a lot of work with orphans and orphanages and some things like that. So I was continuing that work. In 2004, there was a church that needed a pastor, and so I moved out to the rural village. And so as I was working with this church in the rural villages as a pastor, I was trying to figure out how to kind of support myself and also do economic development for the community. So I started a sawmill, and that went all right for a few years until Putin decided to change the laws that had to do with lumber and milling and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of went under. So the next big idea that I had was to do farming. And so in 2010, we started a farm, and then a cow farm, and then started a goat farm, a goat dairy. And that seemed to be going pretty good. In 2014, there was the annexation of Crimea, and the West responded against Russia with these sanctions against agricultural exports and imports, and then Russia responded with their own sanctions. And there was a TV crew that came up, and they thought it was pretty funny that they have these agricultural sanctions going on, limiting the trades of agricultural products between Russia and the West. And here's this American farmer trying to make a go at it in the northern Russian village. And so they were asking me about, what I thought about the sanctions. And I spent, 45 minutes explaining to them that, restrictions on trade, probably not the best thing. We need competition, blah, 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 blah. somewhere in that 45-minute interview, I said something about, well, there's one good thing about all these sanctions. Before, when I took my cheese down to the city to sell it, people would say, why should we buy local, mozzarella when we can just buy good Italian mozzarella? Well, you can't buy Italian mozzarella anymore because there ain't no Italian mozzarella. Then I made a big laugh. And that became like the meme. And so then that went super viral. And before I knew it, I had this YouTube channel that was going. And so whatever, it was a weird thing. And so for the last 6 years since then, I've been doing the YouTube thing as well as my farming. And yeah, we got 100,000 subscribers, and we talk about farming, we talk about faith, we talk about just dealing with family issues and everything around that. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're quite busy. I'm surprised you have much time to interfere with U.S. elections. I mean, apparently that's something but isn't that what passes most Russians? Yeah,
that's exactly right.
No, I'm just obviously kidding. But
farm by day and election interference by night. That's right.
Let me ask you about, I guess I read somewhere that there was a period of time where some people they tried to burn down some of your churches and they stole your goats. And what was the deal with that? What's going on there, right? What are they pissed off about goats and stuff in churches?
Well, you gotta understand that in the American context, you have a pretty strong tradition of multiculturalism, multi-faith, even within the Christian tradition. There's Baptists and Methodists, Pentecostals and Presbyterians and everything. And in Russia, it's very monolithic. First of all, there's just not much religious expression to begin with. And if you are religious, then you're Orthodox and that's it. And if you're not Orthodox, something's wrong with you. Literally anything that's not, Orthodox Christian, they consider to be a cult. And so, I don't know, it's just a different mindset. So yeah, in the course of the 16 years that I worked in the village, we had 3 fires, and I had a dog that got poisoned, a horse that got killed, and about 12 or 15 goats that got killed one time. So, you've got bad people everywhere who are xenophobic or don't understand. But that's part of the work, is to try to, through all that, in spite of all that, show people that there's another way and that there's love and that God can change you. And so that's, if you want to understand, if you ask God for love, what does he do? He gives you hard people for you to learn how to love. So I guess that's the way it works.
Yeah, I think, and that's important to realize that, because people that spend most of their entire life in the U.S., they have a very skewed understanding of how the rest of the world works. And, some of the things that are perceived as, oh my God, it's so horrible here. And you've got other places in the world where, the xenophobia is so much worse. I mean, it's just, it's interesting. But let me ask you, so do you have Russian citizenship now, or are you just still on a visa, or how does that work?
I have what's kind of the equivalent of what is a Russian green card. So it's a permanent residency permit that allows me to live here and work and do everything. I've actually tried to get a Russian citizenship several times, and so far it's just not worked out due to there's a couple technical snafus that have gotten me caught up in the bureaucratic machinery a few times. But I hope that in 2021 I will submit once again and actually get Russian citizenship. So working on that.
Well, good luck to you. Let me ask you if I were thinking about places I'd like to perhaps live in the world, I probably, just not without knowing much, would say probably Siberia would not be my first choice. I mean, I lived up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It was windy and cold all the time, and I didn't really like it. I lived up there for 5 years, and I was like, man, I was glad when I left. But what is Siberia like, other than the gulags and that sort of stuff? But I mean, what's the day-to-day like? What's the culture like? What is the difference between what an average American would perceive?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that Siberia is a landmass. I mean, it stretches from the Ural Mountains all the way to the, Pacific Ocean on the seaboard. It's about the size of 1.5 times the continental U.S. So when you talk about Siberia, you talk about everything from, deep taiga to tundra to forest to mountains to desert to, subarctic. It's pretty amazingly diverse. So it all depends on what part you're in. I'm now living in the absolute most southern part of Siberia that you can be in and still be in Siberia. Just south of where our farm sits now, there's 4 borders. It's the Russian border that borders Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China. So it's just right down south, and we're right up in the Altai mountains. And so if you want to get a mental picture of what it's like here, it's like western Montana or eastern Idaho, North Idaho. It's just these gorgeous, beautiful mountains and forest and these little valleys, almost alpinic. A pretty mild winter. So I mean, in terms for the United States, I guess it's not that, but I mean, you're talking like 5 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, 0 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, mild summers, plenty of rain, beautiful fertile soil. It's a nice place. So yeah, land is cheap. So I mean, it's the best kept secret in the world. So it's like naming Iceland, right? So, Siberia, Gulag. Don't come here.
Well, I mean, Iceland is. I've been to Iceland. Well, I went in January, so I mean, I guess you have to take it with a grain of salt. But it was pretty icy and cold when I went. But it's really north. But you know, and I see. I'm I'm visualizing where you are on the map, and so maybe just kind of just on that northwest corner of Mongolia, just across the border from you, something along those lines, perhaps. And so, yeah. So is there a lot of a Mongolian type population, or who lives there typically outside of the crazy American farmers? But what's a normal population?
Yeah, this area is right on the, again, on the border of what's called the Altai state, or the Altai like region. It's like basically a political sort of makeup thing that's like a United States state, I guess. And then right next to us is the Altai Republic, which is like a giant autonomous zone. That's something like a U.S. reservation, Indian reservation, except for more politically free. And so right here, there's a pretty decent mix. So you've got Russians, and probably 30% of the population or so are Altai. They're an ethnic local indigenous people here that are a little bit Mongoloid-esque, I guess. And then of course there's a pretty big Chinese influence around here as well. You've got Chinese that come and go. So yeah, it's an interesting mix of populations here.
And I'm guessing it's fairly rural. I mean, you're a farmer, so I assume it's somewhat rural, or is there some metropolitan areas in that area?
Well, yeah, there's some big cities in the area, but where is pretty rural. I mean, our county seat is about 5,000 people, so that's the capital, or the seat of the county is about 5,000 people. It's called Sonyashna. The little 2 villages that are closest to my farm are about 350 people and about 150 people, respectively. We are about 500 kilometers south of one of the largest cities in Siberia. It's called Novosibirsk. So that's about, 340 miles away. But yeah, our particular area is pretty rural. There's a lot of little towns, but they're pretty small, about 150, 200, 300 people. We live about 10 kilometers out of town. So it's like 6 miles out of town, just up in a little valley up in the mountains. And that's where the farm is. And that's where I am right now. So, yeah.
And your farm is still primarily goats and a few cattle. Is that where you're at now, or?
Yeah, I dropped the cattle. We did dairy cows for quite a few years up north on the old farm. And in 2016, I moved from up north. I had some issues with asthma, so I moved south, and we decided not to do the large cattle anymore. I like my goats, so we have 60 goats now. Right now I have 62 milking goats, and by last count there were 75 sheep. So we've got a little herd of goats, a little herd of sheep, and that's what we do. What's
the acreage on that, or hectares, or whatever you calculate?
Yeah, we have 102 hectares. Yeah, 102 hectares. It's right at like 248 acres, something like that.
And do you have several? I imagine you got several people working with you, or you don't do it all by yourself, do you?
Yeah, we have the farm here. The business plan that I developed and that we're working on right now is basically got 4 employees, including myself. So there's me, and there's a guy who is a full-time cheese maker. He does cheese all the time. There's another guy who's our salesperson, kind of builder, 4 days of the week, and sales rep in the city 2 days a week. He drives the car out to the city and sells the cheese. There's another guy who helps in the barn and does work on the tractors, and that's our little team. So most of those guys, so myself and then 2 of the other 3 guys have families. The one guy still doesn't have a family, and so we all live here on the farm. They've got their own little houses out there on the land, and have a little community here, and work the farm, and it's pretty good.
So, I mean, it sounds like primarily dairy, or the sheep, are you're using the sheep for meat?
Yeah, sheep is meat, and the goats are dairy. So we have the dairy that's the cheese making process that's completely based on goat milk. And then during the winter months when we're low on goat milk, we buy cow milk from the locals and do an alternative cheese product out of cow milk. And then the sheep are for meat. Yeah. So sheep are wool and meat. We're right now working on trying to get up a miniature wool mill set up to process our own wool and potentially buy up to about 2.5-3 tons of wool from the surrounding areas. But that's kind of still up in the air. But primarily the sheep are for meat. Yeah. So I love my sheep. They're one of the easiest meat animals I've ever raised, and I've raised a lot of different kinds of animals for meat. I really like my sheep.
I've heard that a lot of people will say start with sheep because they're a lot easier to do, and it's there's less work and less investment into that. And like I said, when I lived in New Zealand for a while, and sheep are running around all over. I think at the time I was there was 3 million people and 60 million sheep, and people had them in their yards. You'd walk through the neighborhood and there'd be 3 or 4 sheep sitting in someone's yard, and I heard you could buy one for like $15 or something like that, and it was just I mean that's depending on what they eat. But what you said sheep are the easiest animals for me. Well, which were the hard ones? Which one would you say was a real pain in the butt to raise for meat?
See, I never raised steers, never raised bulls exclusively for meat. Cows were a pain in the rear, largely because there's such a large investment into the cow, and if you're having a problem calving or anything, there's just a lot of anxiety and stress. You don't want to lose an animal, because I mean, our little dairy was 6 to 10 cows at any given time, and that was our entire dairy. And so you have a cow that's calving and things aren't going right. That's like 1/10 of your entire your entire flock right there. And they've got, I don't know. They're a lot of work. The value to investment on the cow, I felt wasn't that great. Pigs also are another one that a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I want a meat animal, get a pig. And they're actually a lot more labor intensive than you imagine because they're so messy. They need a lot of cleanup. They're picky, frankly, strangely enough. Pigs to put on weight, they're really picky about what they eat. So you end up, unless you have like what you might have in the West, like in the United States, like pre-made feeds, everything ready to go, you end up spending a lot of time like brewing brews for your pigs and cooking meals. It's like, what am I doing? I'm cooking for a pig. So it's like, so sheep really, the thing I like about my sheep, like just in comparison, here in the summer, I've got my herd, it's a pretty decent sized herd, and I put them out into summer pasture, which is up on a little 30 hectare pasture that's up at the side of the mountain. And I check them once a week. I mean, they've got water, they've got an electric fence that they stay in, and I go up, I check them once a week, and they're fine. And they're fine all summer long. And then, I take, 40, 45 up there. At the end of the summer, I bring back something like 100, put them in my barn, I butcher a whole bunch of the younger ones, and then I do it again next summer. I mean, it's just really simple, and I really enjoy that. So.
Is there a significant difference in the way farming or ranching is done where you are versus what we might see in the U.S.? Is there any major differences you would know? I don't know if you communicate with people in the U.S. and know about the farming practices here, but is there some major differences that you could point out?
I think the main difference is that the margins here are a lot larger than there are in the States, and so the approach is probably far less analytical, far less like, oh, you got to have everything just working just right. Land is a lot cheaper, so you end up having techniques of farming that are just more land consumptive. They're not quite as worried about using the land as efficiently as they are in the United States. I mean, your average price of agricultural land in the United States right now is something like $7,000 an acre. The average price of agricultural land in Russia right now is like, what is that? 15,000 rubles a hectare, which comes out to something like $100 an acre. So just that price difference alone makes up for a lot of the difference in how you do your work. You have a lot less investment in the land itself. So that's, I guess I can't talk to that so much because I haven't really worked farms in the States. Of course, I talk to farmers, and of course, you try to, you read the stuff online. But if you really want to know how something's done, you kind of have to be on the ground and kind of have to work at some. So I would love to do that. So at some point, come back to the States and work at least a season with someone doing the kind of work, kind of the same thing that I'm doing. So just to see how it's different.
With land prices being so cheap there relative, are you seeing a lot of foreign interest in people from wealthier countries just buying up land and using it for whatever purposes, or is that prohibited, or what's the scenario with that?
Yeah, I think you would see that quite a bit, but it is prohibited by Russian law. So foreigners cannot buy agricultural land. There are some loopholes for foreign corporations to invest and that kind of thing, but actual purchase of land by foreigners directly, agricultural land, is prohibited. So that the result of that is that I personally don't even own my own land. I own it through a surrogate. So you basically have a Russian who owns the land, but then he owes me an amount of money that is equivalent to the land, so that if he ever does something with the land, then he owes me. I have a note, so it's kind of this weird, but that's how it works.
Since as a dairy person, there'll be people in this community that are interested in this. Do you do raw dairy? Do you do pasteurized dairy? Do you do both? Are there laws against raw dairy like there are in the US, or is it how is it over there in Russia?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, kind of following the scene online and from a distance, it seems like the Russian legal infrastructure for just animal products in general, I mean, not just dairy, but meat and dairy, raw and pasteurized, is way, way, way more free than in the United States. Basically, as a producer, I need to have a certificate that says that I've had my vaccinations. I need to have a certificate that says that I've had my spring and fall blood work done. And if I have those, then basically I can sell the products that I produce on my farm.
I'm sorry. When you say vaccination, is that your personal human vaccinations or is it animal vaccination?
No, vaccinations for the flock.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's make sure that your vaccines are up on the flock. Yep. And so they do frown on non-pasteurized products, raw products, but you can sell it. It's not a complete prohibited thing. You have to go through jump through extra hoops. We mostly do pasteurized just because it's easier for sale. If we have people who are interested, we'll do a special batch. Here at our house, we don't pasteurize our own stuff, but because we are in a high encephalitis risk zone with tick-borne encephalitis, we do pasteurize just in case. So that's that.
There's, I guess, I guess one other agricultural question. So, as far as in the U.S. and other places in the world, there's a movement towards what's called regenerative agriculture, where they eliminate herbicides and pesticides, and they try to maximize biodiversity, with foraging techniques and grazing techniques. Is that something that's practiced at all in your part of the world?
It's practiced mostly over here, especially by all the village farmers, and even by some of the larger farmers, even some of the larger corporate farming operations, by default, not by some sort of intentional choice, but mostly because, again, when land is so cheap, it's easier to buy more land and just put it to work that way, as opposed to trying to get the production out of the land per square foot. So the drive for more chemicals is, well, you got to make this acres produce because of taxes, because of loans, because of mortgages, because of everything else. And so you kind of get into this vicious cycle of, well, we got to make 40-acre bushels, we got to make 50-acre bushels, we've got to make 60-acre bushels. So we got to put in the put in the nitrogen, we got to put in the herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, we got to do the whole thing. Because we got to make it pay, and the main driver of that pay is your land costs. And with the land costs here being so low, we're kind of haven't even entered into that cycle yet. Whereas the United States, you've kind of since the 60s, late 70s, you guys have gone through the cycle of putting more and more and more inputs into land. It makes more and more produce, but then there's diminishing returns. You get more produce, but you have to put more in, and then you kind of come around this vicious cycle of, well, wait a second, regenerative agriculture might make sense if you're putting so much money into inputs that it's barely making up for the extra increase. Then why not just go back to something simpler? I hope that we in Russia can kind of skip the middle, kind of see that there is a way of doing things more organically, there's a way of doing things more regeneratively, and not go through that whole chemical cocktail process. But time will tell. So here on the farm, I do rotational pasturing. We overseed. We try not to plow if we can, get away with it on our pastures and hay ground. We spread manure. We do compost. We do compost tea. We kind of try to keep things regenerative, keep things as organic as possible. Because in the long term, I think you kind of shoot yourself in the foot when you kill your own biodiversity. So that's kind of what we're up to.
Yeah, I think a lot of farms here and even in the U.S. are just starting to discover that, and I think there's just an organic movement towards that because it becomes ultimately more profitable for them to do that in the long term. Let me ask you about the local diets in there, because obviously, well, I mean, assume again a relatively rural area with some larger cities. Is there, I mean, with the different ethnicities in that region that you're in, it's a very diverse region apparently. Any sort of food practices stand out? Is there any kind of thing that dominates the landscape as far as nutrition wise?
Yeah, this area is pretty monolithic as far as food is concerned. Pretty standard Russian diet. So you're looking at a lot of potatoes, a lot of carrots, a lot of beets, a lot of buckwheat. That's a staple. A lot of oats and oatmeal, some rice, and then they'll supplement those grains with occasional meat. So the meat of choice is beef, pork, and chicken, and then you'll have vegetable like garden vegetables that can supplement that. A lot of people here are, I don't know, self-sustaining. That's such a weird term because I never know what people mean by that. But so many of the Russian villagers, and I mean, they're putting up easily anywhere between 50 to 75% of their calories that they consume in a year. They're producing on their own little plot, even if they're not farmers, even if it's just like some guy who's got a job, like my neighbor down the road. Well, he's in the village, so it's 6 miles down the road. But a friend of mine, he's an electrician, and he also kind of runs the local telephone system. He's not a farmer, but they definitely put up at least 75, maybe as much as 80% of their own calories. So they can a lot. The Russians do a lot of pickles and preserves of all kinds. So that's kind of your potatoes, root crops, lots of soups, and then a lot of canned preserved things from the summer from the garden.
What about yourself? What does your diet look like? I mean, I guess obviously you've got some dairy and some meat available to you. What do you do day to day?
Yeah, our family, the way we eat as a family is also try to keep it pretty simple. We really work hard on producing as many calories as we can here on the farm and consuming locally. So yeah, we probably look a lot like our Russian neighbors, except for as I always explain to the Russians, we eat a lot of hard food, which means not so many soups. I'm not too not too much of a fan of the watery soup. If I want water, I'll drink a glass of water. Otherwise, give me some hard food. So so it's we'll eat some kind of a porridge or something in the morning, like oatmeal, rice, or buckwheat, and then we'll have some kind of meat with lunch, and usually like a potato or some other kind of vegetable that we grow ourselves, and same thing for dinner. So yeah, something like that. That's our general standard diet that our family eats. And then of course, because we have the dairy, we're always drinking milk. We've always got cream. We've always got sour cream that we put on everything. We always have cheese on the table, of course. So that's a big supplement. We have our own chickens living on the farm. So we have a whole bunch of eggs that we eat. So that's kind of how we mix it up.
I had a patient one time who was another physician who was actually a vascular surgeon, came to me for, I can't remember the condition I was treating her for. It was something orthopedic, and she was Russian, and we were talking about something, and she was complaining about the American patients and saying something along the line, in Russia, we don't really believe in pain, or something along that line. Really kind of a hard-natured sort of, suck it up there. Yeah. You stop whining type of stop whining, you soft Americans. What is I mean, hopefully you can avoid it, but what is the healthcare situation like in there? Is it more lifestyle made, or is it more a lot of drugs, or how does a healthcare system work there?
Well, first of all, Russia has a social healthcare system. So, healthcare is free here. If you get sick, you can go to the hospital, and they will treat you to some degree. The problem is that level of treatment is pretty low.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah, you basically, that's so true. You in so many ways that is so true. And so, for instance, you go to the standard, local dentist, the guy who's in the social healthcare system, and he'll start pulling out your tooth or working on you and never offer you anesthesia, because an anesthetic is extra pay, and he just assumes that if you're in the government clinic, you don't want to pay for anything that you don't have to, and so that's where you grit your teeth and bear it, sort of kind of thing. It's just like insane, and it's pretty rough. It's pretty brutal, which is so strange, because you go outside of the social healthcare system to the competing like private clinics, and you have to pay something. It's not free. It's and by Russian standards, it's probably a little bit expensive, but man, it sure is a different experience. So so this is a very strange, sort of weird world where you have people who are kind of lower middle class to lower class people, sort of the bottom half of the population is stuck with this healthcare system that works, but it's pretty brutal, pretty rough around the edges. And then you have the sort of the upper half of the population that tries to use the private system as much as possible. So Russians are at the same time more aware of what they eat. They're very concerned about things being natural and things being good for you, I think more than the United States. But at the same time, they have these big blind spots. Like, for instance, they don't drink water at all, and so everyone's got kidney problems. So so it's this, it's like any culture, we have our blind spots.
Is it, when you don't drink water, I assume you're drinking bottled, maybe colas, or maybe perhaps alcohol. Is there a concern over the safety of the water, is why that's being done, or what's the rationale for that?
I think it's just a cultural norm. I have no idea where it started, or maybe where the opposite started, where like water drinking cultures really, really, started to take off in the history of humanity. I really don't know, because Russia has the largest, reserve of fresh water in the world. I mean, on my property that I'm living on right now, I've got two beautiful springs, two beautiful spring-fed creeks that start right here on my property, and that's just kind of the norm all over the area. And for most of Russia, anywhere you just want to drop a tap in the ground, you're going to get really good, clean groundwater for the most part. So it's just like they're not as avid cola drinkers or carbonated beverage drinkers as we are in the States. But a lot of tea, a lot of vodka, a lot of alcohol, a lot of tea, a lot of coffee, and actually just don't drink that much in comparison to the United States, period, as far as just drinking liquids. Like, to go around with a drink is just like, you drink at a meal, you drink at tea time, you drink with your buds, and the rest of the time you just kind of, I don't know, don't get thirsty, I guess. I don't know. So I haven't figured that one out.
Do you, well, you probably have to be living under a rock to not notice there seems to be a global push to distance people from eating animal-based products, and veganism being more popular in certain parts of the world, and even some countries, dictating it into their guidelines. Are there eating guidelines in Russia? Is there like a national policy for what you're supposed to eat? Are you seeing any effect on? I mean, maybe in that part of the world, maybe you don't have vegan activists protesting, or is veganism a popular choice in the place you live?
Well, I mean, yeah, I definitely have noticed that global sort of push. Russia always kind of stands a little bit at arm's length distance from sort of the rest of the, I don't know, Western world. Kind of, the old Russian double-headed eagle, the imperial insignia. It's got one head looking towards the west, one head looking toward the east. It kind of holds itself at a distance from both. The veganism issue is interesting. About the Russian guidelines, yes, there's a Ministry of Health. Yes, there's something akin to the USDA, but I have never seen a food pyramid in Russia. Like, I don't even think we have a term for it. Like, there's somebody out there, some bureaucrat, pushing beans around, counting numbers, but who knows what they're up to. So it's not as pervasive here as recommendations from on high seem to be in the United States. There's kind of this strange parroting act that happens among very progressive people in Russia. So they see sort of the new fad that's going on in the States or in the West in general of some sort of progressive thing, and then they kind of start parroting it. So you get your vegans around here. I have seemed to feel like the harshness of the climate in Russia in general, like the whole country living, North Dakota and more northern than that, for the most part, as far as our latitude goes, just seems to have a sobering effect on people. I mean, you get into the middle of the winter and it's -30 outside. You want to burn some fat. I mean, you want some bacon. You don't want to go chew on celery. I mean, it's just the basic reality of dealing with, Mother Nature. I mean, it's like, yeah, you go be a vegan and die. It's like, I don't know. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we have some people that are definitely distanced from reality. What obviously, Russia has been considered the enemy of the United States for since World War II, basically. And we went through the Cold War, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union in '91, and I think it was 91, maybe it was 81, I can't remember. But they've had whenever the Berlin Wall came down, but they've had are there regional differences in the political bent of Russia, like the rural versus maybe Moscow? How is the United States viewed in Russia? Are we considered the evil empire or the evil bad guys, or how does that work there? What's the average person think?
I think the view of the United States in the eyes of the average Russian has changed over the last 30 years. Like, I grew up in Russia since 1994, so I spent 6 years in the 90s here, and then my entire adult life I've spent over here. And I've just seen over the course, especially the last 20 years, of how the average Russian's vision of America has changed. In that, in the 90s or even in the early 2000s, everyone looked up to America. It was something like, we want to go and live there, but even more than that, we want to be like Americans. Like we want to import some kind of a democracy that looks like American. We want to, to mimic in some ways American culture. And there was this sort of affinity for the American dream, the American way of life. And in the last 20 years, we've really lost that. More and more and more Russians see America as the aggressor, as the person who's out to get them, out to get the Russian interests. And so, I think that there is a real unfortunate opportunity that was lost in the 90s when the Berlin Wall came down, when communism collapsed. Reagan basically made a verbal deal with Gorbachev that if they dissolved the Soviet Union, that the United States would basically freeze NATO expansion and would, end the war on communism, because communism would be no longer. And in the 90s, in the time of, especially from like 91 through 2004, 2005, the West in general, America in particular, used that opportunity to expand NATO everywhere as far as possible, zones of influence all the way into Russia's backyard, everywhere. And the sort of anti-Russian, Americans can park naval ships in the Black Sea, literally 100 kilometers off the shore of Russia. But if Russia flies a MiG, fighter plane past those naval cruisers, that's aggression, right? That are the cruisers are sitting. I was back in 2016. I was back in the States, and there was some big story about, Russians are acting recklessly. Russian fighters are cruising American ships, and there was this big furor in the news about it. And people are like, "What do you think about that? What do you think about that?" And I was like, look at the fine print. Where were those cruisers? Like, where were the American naval ships? They were in the Black frickin' Sea, 150 kilometers off the shore of Russia. Like, what do you guys think you're doing over there? Like, I mean, if you reverse the analogy, like if the Russians were doing the same thing in our side of the world, we would never stand for it. And again, I'm not trying to say that there's necessarily a moral equivalency or anything, but you got to walk a mile in another man's moccasins. So in general, I think there's been a real unfortunate opportunity lost where most Russians have kind of turned inward or turned their eyes towards Asia. And that great hope of some kind of American-Russian, at least, if not alliance, at least some kind of a partnership, I think is more or less lost. So that's a real unfortunate thing.
So having seen that develop for the last 20 years, do you find you get some backlash for being an American? Obviously, people know you're an American living there. Do they rail against you or complain? Or, I mean, obviously, I guess you've had things burned down and attacked, but is that something that still persists today? Or are you kind of considered, the bad guy?
Personally, there's always kind of a joke. There's always kind of a playful animus with people. Oh, you're the American, For the most part, I speak fluent Russian. Sometimes, especially when I'm out of practice, I feel like I speak better Russian than English. So I've also spent my whole life here. I've built my farms. I've built my businesses. I've raised my family here. So I think most people have an understanding that I'm here by my own choice. Of all the people here, I was the only person who decided to move here. So I think that gains me some brownie points with the locals. But yeah, there's still always that thing in the background that, if push comes to shove, you're still the American. So that's a little, can be a little unsettling.
And have you had opportunity to visit all parts of Russia, or you kind of been mostly in that Siberian area?
Yeah, since the YouTube fame that happened back in 2014 and building my YouTube channel, I've kind of developed a routine, well, before COVID happened, of during the winter months when there's less farm work to do, of traveling and attending conferences and presenting at seminars and doing teachings on, on family, on farming, and all the kind of topics around that. And so that's given me opportunity to really see a lot more of Russia. So yeah, I've traveled very extensively in Siberia and also in the European part of Russia. Not so much in the Far East, although I was over in Vladivostok once, even went to Japan from there and then back. But yeah, so I've been all the way across Russia, but mostly traveled in the Siberian, sort of Western Siberian part, and then in the Western part of Russia. So yeah, all pretty all over.
Have you had any, like Jordan Jonas, have you had any contact with, some of these nomadic folks, these indigenous folks that do the reindeer stuff, or perhaps even some of the rural Mongolians that are basically animal-based? As you probably may be aware, we're a bunch of people that eat pretty much exclusively animal-based products and are happy to do so and doing the best hells of our lives with this. Have you had any sort of experience with those guys?
Most of the contact that I had with the Evenki people was through Jordan. The last year that my parents were here, they started a church way up north, and of course I was involved in that. And that was in a community of Evenki peoples. They're indigenous peoples, but they were settled in a village and pretty much were doing a standard Russian diet at that point. So I did not have that opportunity to really get to know the nomadic peoples like Jordan did. So far that's been our experience. Yeah.
Assuming at some point in the world we're allowed to travel again and move freely, and that we don't have these lockdowns and travel restrictions and so on, quarantine restrictions, if somebody wanted to visit Russia, how hard is it to do? Can you, without knowing the language, is it particularly difficult? Can you get by speaking English? And where would you recommend someone visit if they wanted to go to Russia? It was kind of interesting I think I had a 10-year ban where I wasn't allowed to go to Russia because back in a former life, I used to launch nuclear bombs for the U.S. Air Force, and so I had this top secret clearance, and I wasn't allowed to travel to China, Russia, or other communist countries. This is back in the 90s. I signed this agreement that says I will not go to these countries, but that's passed. And I would, certainly wouldn't mind visiting other parts of the world at some point, and I think Russia would be kind of interesting to visit, perhaps. So what are your thoughts about people wanting to do tourism in Russia? What would you recommend?
Yeah. I've got my own personal biases towards Siberia, of course. It's a lot like people who want to go to see the United States. Of course, you're going to hit the big cities. You're going to go to New York, Chicago, whatever. So same thing in Russia. You're going to hit, Moscow. You're going to go to St. Petersburg. Probably that's interesting to see. But beyond that, if you want to see, real life, it's good to get over here on this side of the Urals, out in the east. And there's a lot of smaller cities, medium-sized cities, smaller cities that you can come and see. And I suggest everyone come down to the Altai. We've got some of the most beautiful landscapes, amazing summers, just absolutely gorgeous. So it's a wonderful place to come in the summer and just spend. I'm amazed at how many people I see bicycling through the Altai. Some guy from Israel. A few years ago, I stopped, he was bicycling through, and some Germans and some Norwegian people. So, people do it for sure. And for the most part, Russians are strangely xenophobic and very hospitable at the same time. It's sort of the paradox of the Russian soul. So, Russia for Russians, but I'll feed you, So it's just, it's a strange thing. So yeah, I would really suggest the Altai region for sure, and that would be for a tourist.
And then if someone were to go there, speaking about some of the regional cuisine, are there any sort of must foods that you would eat, both suitable for people maybe on a carnivore diet and for people on a general standard diet? What would you recommend?
Well, you definitely have to do the kind of the foods that are non-traditional for an American palate, but are very traditional here. One of them is sala, which is basically just pork fat. It's not like bacon, but it's when you take a pig and you scald the pig, and then you cut down to the meat, and you get the pork rind, just the fat, and they usually just salt it, freeze it, and then they cut it up into slices and eat it raw. Well, it's they see, this is another thing. Russians never consider anything that's been salted to be raw. Like, we'd say, you're eating raw pig fat. And they're like, no, it's not raw, it's salted. What are you talking about? Like, it's been prepared, you know? So that's one thing. I really am rather partial to the good old sala. It's really good. Then they do a pickled herring that's really tasty. Again, just a little bit strange to the American palate, but good. Russians do there's a kind of a Chinese influence. They have something that's called pelmeni, which is a little bit like pot lickers. That's not totally carnivore. Russians, strangely enough, even though we have so much land here and stuff, their diet in general is not so meat intensive. But definitely you can get good meat if you're looking for it. So.
Yeah, and I just wonder, I mean, outside of, I guess, Mongolia and the Evenki, I mean, is I don't know if our carnivore diet has penetrated much into Russia. Probably not yet, but I don't know if have you heard about that over there at all, or anybody mentioned it?
Yeah, I had a very just amazing, strange, wonderful sort of experience with carnivore diet, just myself. And I've strangely become one of these weird people on the internet that, if you look up carnivore diet in Russian, I'm one of the guys who comes up and tells the story. And today I was actually doing Ask Me Anything sessions on my channel, and a whole bunch of the questions were about my experience with the carnivore diet. When we moved down south 4 years ago from the main farm, from the old farm up north to the new farm, within 6 months, so we moved in fall of 2016, built some yurts out in the middle of the field, just absolutely nothing, just a couple of yurts, an outhouse, and that was that. And then we wintered over in 2017, started building the farm, and I got bit by 3 ticks that spring. And one of them carried encephalitis, one of them carried Lyme's, and based on encephalitis and Lyme's, also developed meningitis. So I was down with 3 very nasty conditions, in the hospital for several weeks, kind of semi-comatose for about a week. Very, very scary, near-death type experience. The doctors got me back to this side of the grave, kept me here, and I'm thankful to them for that. But several months after I got out of the hospital, I realized that the encephalitis had done what it had done. The meningitis was gone, but I was still dealing with chronic Lyme's symptoms. And as time went on, those symptoms just got worse and worse, to where, I mean, I was sleeping 16, 18 hours a day. I couldn't work. I mean, if I do any kind of physical labor that was more than maybe 30 minutes of intensive work, I was, doubled over, dry heaving, completely incapacitated, just shaking and throwing up. And it was absolutely terrible. I was suffering with these heart palpitations and panic attacks and depression and like stuff that I'd never dealt with at all, ever in my life. And this went on for like 2.5 years. And so I was just looking for solutions to Lyme's. Like I kept reading books. Jordan sent me a couple books. Actually, Jordan Jonas, that was on your show, and sent me some, herbal remedies for Lyme's, and some other friends of mine sent me enzymes, and we were trying to find the silver bullet for this thing. And I kept running across these, again, non-scientific, anecdotal, not peer-reviewed studies or anything, but just anecdotal experiences of people who said, I beat Lyme's, I had chronic Lyme's, I completely got rid of it, not just the symptoms, the actual underlying disease. And the way I did it was carnivore diet for 3 months, carnivore diet for 6 months. And I kept running into these testimonials completely independently of each other. And then finally I was listening to Tim Ferriss from the 4-Hour Work Week. I listen to his podcast rather regularly. And he had a Ask Me Anything session where somebody asked him how he beat his Lyme's disease. And I had no idea that Tim had ever had Lyme's. So it's like, oh, wow, okay, this is interesting. As it turns out, in his 20s, back when he was younger, he had Lyme's and it had gone chronic, and he somehow way back then had also heard about the carnivore diet and had done a full protein-based diet, only animal protein, for like 3 months, and he beat his Lyme's. And so finally I was just like, man, I keep running into these random testimonials, and here's a guy who, you know, more or less, for better or worse, you know, trust him. Might as well try it out. And so last year, it was 2019, in December. Well, actually, almost exactly a year ago, almost exactly a year ago to the day, I decided that I was going to go on this carnivore diet. So I had a steer that a neighbor of mine was selling, and so I butchered that. I bought that, butchered that, put it in the freezer, and then butchered a bunch of sheep, put those in the freezer, and went on a 6-month, very strict beef and mutton, goat only diet. Water, coffee, beef, mutton, goat, a little bit of chicken here and there, but pretty much that was that. And it was so crazy. I don't want to overstate it because I hate it when people go into hyperbole, but within 2 weeks, like it was like 10 days to 2 weeks, I was already completely, well, not completely, but mostly symptom free. The worst symptoms of the Lyme's were gone. Some of the underlying anxiety, panic, and stuff was still there. Within 3 to 4 weeks, I was feeling like a new person. 2 months into it, I literally felt like had been raised from the dead. Like, I didn't realize how sick I had been until I got better. It was this situation where I felt like I'd been raised from the dead. Like I had actually died for 2 years, 2.5 years, and here I was coming back to life. And so I was on the carnivore diet, very strict for 3 months, and then after 3 months, I started adding. I don't know how we would term it in English, but sour milk products, so cheese, sour cream, cultured milk products, I guess you'd call it, cheese, sour cream, kefir, some things like that into the meat mix, but not much, just a little bit. And I was on that for another 3.5 months, and then I went and got checked for Lyme's, and they said they could not detect any Lyme's in the system. So I did a couple different tests, and that's that. So I don't know that there are very many people in Russia talking about the carnivore diet, but I am because a lot of people in Russia have Lyme's. It's a pretty, because of the tick population, because of our climate, there are a lot of people who have Lyme's, and it's a nasty, nasty, nasty disease. And if this works for other people to get rid of that disease, then I am more than happy to share my story, and of course feel compelled to do so. So that's my story about carnivore diet.
Yeah, and you're not alone with that. I mean, I've seen numerous people with a similar type of thing with Lyme's, and then of course many other things. Did the doctors, were they curious at all? Did you say, hey, I was on this crazy all meat diet and it went away, or did they even bother to ask about that stuff?
No, pretty much didn't bother to ask about that stuff. I mean, I went and got tested at a private clinic. They had no idea of my story or anything like that. So it's just, I just go into a lab and get a test and get a battery of tests done. But yeah, I get more and more questions every day. Today there's several subscribers who are suffering from Lyme's, who are starting out today on their Lyme's journey, so carnivore diet journey. So this will be interesting to see how it turns out.
Well, that's totally awesome that you got better, and it's good to see. And thank you for doing this. We've gone through an hour here, which has been just wonderful. So much stuff there. Keep being our Russian ambassador for the carnivore community out there. That's great to see, and wish you good luck. And anything else you want to say before we let you go, or how do people? I mean, I'm assuming most of your stuff is done in Russian, so I'm not sure how many people, and maybe some people. How would people find you if they wanted to hear about your story or follow you on social media or that type of stuff?
Yeah, if you want to go to sent2siberia.com, sent2siberia.com, that forwards to my English language YouTube channel. I'm not there very often, but I am there. I guess the thing that I stress, I'm not like a strict converted carnivore person in life in general. Like I had this experience where I used it as a medicine. It worked really well for me. But one of the things that I always tell people is, the idea of sustainability, we talk about in the West, in America, a lot of people say, oh, I want to be sustainable. I want to be self-sustainable. I want to be producing my own food. And they go the first thing they do is go plow up the garden or the backyard and plant a garden. And for the work that you invest into, small scale backyard farming, your vegetable garden will consume about 50% of the time. If you were to produce 100% of your own food, spend the time necessary to do that, vegetable gardening will give you about 10% of your calories for about 50% of your time. Working with animals and doing animal husbandry, especially meat, but dairy and eggs as well, you'll spend about 15% of your time on your animals and get like 60%, 70% of your calories. So I do not think that the vegan propaganda holds up to good old Mother Nature. I think that we as humans are fundamentally omnivores, and I think that animal products have a major role to play in our everyday diet. And if you want to be sustainable, do animal husbandry, and God bless you.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Justice. Have a great, I guess, evening. I assume it's evening or late in the morning or early in the morning there, I would assume. I don't know. But yeah, you're almost, I guess it must be after midnight there, I'm guessing. But thank you for doing this.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Anyway, have a
Thank
great.
you for having me.
Look forward to hearing more about you down the road. Okay.
All right. Bye
Okay,
now.
everybody. We'll see everybody back tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Have a good day, guys.